So in this video, I'm gonna talk about the tools that I'm using to build the Monaco. And not that I think these tools are the best, but they're just what I'm using and they work well for me. So I'm gonna start with my dust collection system. I originally started with a Delta single stage dust collector, and I added a filter. It used to have some kind of cloth bag on top, so these actually work much better for collecting the finer dust. And also my son helped me, and we converted this from a single stage to a two stage by using a trash can like this, and then I made a thin baffle to go inside there, and you can read about that online to see how that's done. And what that does is it collects the bigger chips and things in this, and then only finer stuff actually gets sucked in to the dust collector and ends up in the bag there. And so I also I've got 4-inch hose on the bottom of the dust collector. It actually has 2 ports for 2 4-inch hoses, but I only use one of them. And then I just have a long hose that I kind of move around as needed. And I also have a valve that I can shut it off here, because I also have it permanently, I say permanent, the hose just on the ground, but going to my belt sander. So and I also have a port there or a valve, so I can shut that off depending on what I'm using. And so this actually works really well, even though it is kind of a contraption looking thing. And it is on wheels. We had to add a little bit of extensions and boards to set that trash can on, but pretty much it just stays here. I don't move it a whole lot. Also, so I have a drill press that I use, just nothing fancy, and use that frequently earlier on when you're making frames, and just whenever you need it. You just never know exactly. So here's the belt sander that I have. I've had this for a long time too, well, the drill press too. And what I did is I added some dust collection to this thing, because when I built a TNT about 10 years ago, and this thing was the major offender at creating dust. I mean, it just flies everywhere. Well, I added some sheet metal, and down here some additional sheet metal, and hooked it up. I've got a Y that goes up, and this actually, I cut a hole in to suck dust from the bottom of this plastic thing, and cut a hole up here. And now with this, when I'm running my dust collector with this thing, which I do all the time, it basically doesn't create any dust, very little. So that actually works really well. I've got a little air compressor that I used, and I actually have it connected up, and I've got that reel there, which I didn't have until less than a year ago, and that is really handy to have for my air nailer when you're doing all the planking on the boat. I've got an air nailer, which actually I'll show that now since we're here, using this composite brad nailer. And so yeah, there's thousands of those in this boat so far, for mostly in the planking. All right, so I'm gonna show the Fest tool. I don't have really super fancy tools. I do have this one though. This is a linear sander, and so what I use that for is sanding the final planking on the sides. It works nice. No, get swirl marks and things. I know with a random orbital, you can actually, if you're careful, you can do it where you don't really see swirl marks, but this works nice. You don't have to worry about that at all. And so my final sanding before I stain on the side planking, actually that's what I used to sand before, and then I will sand when I get close to finishing and things, and I'll do it on the decking too. So drill, of course, I've got a drill, and actually I got this drill set for last Christmas, and I got an impact driver, and so I highly recommend that. I didn't have that for a lot of the screws that I did earlier in the build, but an impact driver, if you've never used one, get one. It really makes driving screws much easier. Plus, if you drill in a pilot hole, and then you have the impact driver with your screw bit in it, you don't have to switch back and forth. And then I'll show this. These are in no particular order, of course. This is a drill guide, and I've used that when I'm drilling holes on the bottom of the boat for like the strut and rudder and also the fin. And it's just nice to be able to make sure that you're doing it vertical. So that is handy to do. And then I, of course, mount it on something, and when you're placing it on the boat, you have to use shims and things and get it in position. And I've got a little level that I put on here to make sure it was pretty close. So you don't have to be perfect with these, but it's nice to get close if you can. Here's a few miscellaneous things I use. Calipers, I recommend these. You just never know what you need to check various dimensions and diameters of. Also knee pads, highly recommend these. A lot of crawling around when you build a boat like this, doing side planking, whatever, underneath, all sorts of things. So you're crawling, kneeling, and that really helps protect the knees. And then I use various sizes of graduated marked mixing cups. It makes mixing epoxy a lot easier, and you can make tick marks to help depending on what you're doing, if it's 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 or whatever, and so that makes life easier too. Here's the hand belt sander that I have, and I did the bulk of my fairing with this tool actually, and I use different grits of belts for that. And then I made an adapter to fit my dust collection hose, and actually this hose is a Bosch brand hose that's meant to go with my Jigsaw, but I was able to use the same hose, made an adapter, so that just kind of friction fits in there and it works pretty well. And the dust collection works pretty well with this. So this hose, I've got a reducer that hooks up to into my 4-inch hose, and that actually works pretty well because this tool also blows the dust out. So the combination of those two works pretty well. It doesn't get all of the dust, but you don't get a lot flying in the air actually with that. And so this hose, the Bosch brand, the reason it's Bosch brand is because I bought it to go with my Bosch Jigsaw, and of course use this to cut out frames and whatever you need. But I also bought this with a dust collection kit, and so it's got this shroud that goes in the front, and then on the back, I don't have it handy here, little piece, you can see that little hole fit in there, and then I was able to hook this hose up to it. And what I found, it just didn't work good, because what happened was with this shroud on here, the bigger chunks would just kind of collect in there, and you couldn't see where you were cutting. And so what I found is I just don't use that at all, and I take my 4-inch hose and just kind of, as I'm cutting, I have that nearby, and if I can two-hand it, if I don't need, I always clamp the piece down. And so one hand I'm using the saw, and the other hand I'm just going alongside with a 4-inch hose and my dust collector going. That works way better. So I found out that it's a much more practical way to do it. And so that dust collection kit I just don't use anymore. And this tool, my table saw, this is the tool that I've used certainly one of the most. And I have a portable variety because I'm working within my garage and third stall, so I need to be able to take it down and put it up as needed when I'm not using it. So, and it also has a dust collection port on the back, and so I can hook that up to there. And it's got good guarding on it. I know it's kind of a pain to use all these guards, but I highly recommend it. So there's the way this snaps on, the riving knife, it's just kind of built into this whole assembly, and then these are anti-kickback arms, and then these also help with guarding and protection and keep your hands away and so forth. And if any kind of kickback, that would help. Well, that along with these would help. And then there's a dust collection port up here too. So I used the same small hose that I hooked up to my hand belt sander, and so I can actually friction fit that right in there. And I've got a Y adapter, so I have both this port and that port hooked up, and it does a pretty good job. It gets most of the dust. There's a little bit that flies out. Some comes out the front a little bit, but not too much. And so this is another saw that's kind of a must. you either have to borrow one or something if you don't have one, because to cut all the pieces, all the battens and shear and chine logs and all those pieces, and even like the side planking, I ripped all those. All my plywood, when you're ripping pieces of plywood when you're doing the cold molding process, all that I cut with this. The other tool that I did use for some of that sometimes by hand is my hand skill saw up there. So that's another tool that you use as needed, but the table saw is the one that I use the most. And and I've got some jigs that fit in here. I guess I can show you that help. I mean, these are not certainly fancy ones, but one came this all, and then I got this one so I could have two, and they fit in there so you can hold things at 90-degree angles, or whatever angle you need. So, so a tool like this definitely is a must. Another tool that I use quite a bit is this planer. I'm not going to pull it out because it is heavy. It's over 90 pounds. It is a DeWalt planer, and it's got a dust collection port on it. This is actually the back side of it, and then this adapter fits on, and I can hook my 4-inch dust collection hose up to it, and that works good because this planer actually blows the stuff out, and that in combination with my dust collector, it pretty much doesn't make hardly any dust. And so you use that a lot when you need to plane down. At least for me, for my pretty wood side planking, for example, it came roughly 1/4 inch, and I wanted it 5 millimeters. So I planed all these pieces down, and the other pieces, like frames, were all like the shear pieces. Are supposed to be 1/2 inch thick, and typically, if you buy finished 4/4 stock, it's roughly 3/4 inch thick. So you have to plane that. And so there are various times you need it, and I will use it for decking and so forth. So I recommend. You pretty much need one of these, or you'll need to borrow one or something.